Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking over the weekly meta breakdown for Explorer Best of One. The reason we're going to be focusing on today, the Best of One format, is the Qualifier play-in on Friday will be Explorer Best of One. The actual Mythic Invitational Qualifier for this month is Explorer Best of Three, but that's the following weekend. So ahead of that, we will produce a Best of Three version. But for the time being, we're going to be focusing on this weekend's qualifier play-in and give you a bunch of options that you can consider for the event. As always, we get the data from MTGA, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, aggregates your own win rates with other users, gives us cool stats and details like that. The big thing is we had cons that came in the last little bit that gave us an introduction of things like Treasure Cruise, which did put Phoenix more akin to what we see in the Pioneer version. We are missing Smuggler's Copter, which is seeing play in a lot of different decks. So like a lot of the Rakdos decks in Pioneer have adapted to it, for example. We are going to look at Diamond and Mythic rank for about 3 weeks worth of data as opposed to one. Just basically from Con's release, we're going to look at what's kind of trended from there. But we're going to start by looking at popularity of the day. We're going to look Platinum Mythic rank, and then we'll look at Diamond and Mythic rank for the actual results. And this is going to be just kind of an idea of what the spread of decks you should be seeing as, what you can kind of anticipate, and then we'll look at the decks themselves. So popular deck doesn't necessarily correlate to the highest win rate, but sometimes it does in that case. But the most popular decks right now are Amalia, Abzan. So this is the combo deck, the Explorer combo. Very popular right now. Probably the deck, if I was playing in it, that I would go with. Tends to be a bit very linear, very kind of combo focus, where it's easy to find the pieces through like tutor effects, and we'll go into the details. But very powerful deck, probably what I'd play. Azorius Control, another popular deck at 7.6. Control's another interesting. I usually prefer to be more proactive in these kind of best of one than reactive. But we'll take a look at Control. Izzet Phoenix. So there's an Izzet Phoenix and a Grixis Phoenix. Both are ones we'll take a look at. Rakdos Midrange, Selesnya Angels, always like a popular deck. I wouldn't necessarily want to take it. It's very polarizing. You have some really good matchups, but then some really weak ones. And there's not, like, your hand is kind of your hand that it is. Mono Green Devotion, people are still trying to play it without Karn, Boros Heroic, and then Mono Red Burn. So we look at kind of the trends. We've seen Amalia's, and then we've seen some of the other decks. If we pop these in, I don't think we're going to see a huge amount of representation, but for the most part, it's been fairly static. We've seen a rise of both Izzet Phoenix, and like towards the end, we saw Selesnya Angels kind of picking up, potentially as kind of just go bigger than the Phoenix decks. So it might be that the Angels deck is somewhat reasonable, but the Angels deck's been the stock list forever. Just literally just go on my Aether Hub, find any of the Angels decks. Not really worth featuring or deep diving. I wouldn't recommend necessarily going Angels. So we are going to look Diamond here. We are going to look at 50 games played as the minimum cap. Diamond and Mythic, 26,000 games played. And we're going to jump into it with Amalia combo. So 76% win rate for this particular list here. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the combo, if you have, where is Miss Amalia? Amalia Benavides Aguirre, 2 mana, 2/2. Whenever you gain life, you explore, and then when its power is exactly 20, you destroy all other creatures. So with Amalia out, so the ideal turn is like Luminarch Veteran into Amalia into Wildgrowth Walker. That triggers a life gain, which then whenever you gain life, you trigger Amalia, which explores, and then that lets you gain 3 life from Wildgrowth Walker. It loops through, you gain a ton of life. Amalia hits 20 power, destroys all other creatures, you attack with a 20 power Amalia. That's kind of the straightforward line. You could also gain life with like Prosperous Innkeeper, the Gilded Goose treasures. You can trigger Explore with Sinnoh Guide, so lots of different ways to kind of do that. You can also just kind of find your combo piece with Corticolian and Collected Company. When you can't necessarily attack, or if you don't want to go to the attack step, if you hit a Dina, whenever you gain the life, you can also drain your opponent, they lose 1 life. So that's another kind of win through that. Notably, if Genera goes above 21 power, it's just a draw. it'll just keep going through the loop because it doesn't actually break the cycle. There's no may condition, it's you have to. So something to keep in mind. Protection of Selfless Savior. You can also return combo pieces with Return to the Rank. The one card, and I welcome the feedback in the comments, I cannot figure out why G Arena is in here. The concept makes sense in sacrificing it. Humans you control gain hexproof and indestructible to the turn, but Vampire Scout, Dryad Druid, Halfling Citizen, Elemental Dog. Okay, so you're going to keep your Luminarch Veteran alive, or your guild, like, it's only Luminarch Veteran. So, like, I don't understand why this is in here. So let me know. This is the one that I'm kind of stumped on. Usually I have an explanation for pretty much all these, but this one's got me stumped. We then go to Azorius Control, 72%. And this version's well built for these kind of heavier aggro and combo decks. You see things like Temporary Lockdown, eats away at pretty much everything in the Abzan core. March Otherworldly Light, Get Lost is cheap removal. Spring Verdict is some sweeper effects. Farewell deals with the graveyard as well. Then you have some cheap counters and Change the Equation, Dovin's Veto, and Make Disappear, as well as Absorb. Wandering Emperor, Teferi, and Shark Typhoon as win conditions, some card advantage and Memory Deluge. And then we're seeing a couple copies of Restless Anchorage in the mana base now, along with Hall of the Storm Giants, as well as Castle Ardenvale. So utility lands that can win you the game in there as well. Phoenix is being silly for me now, so the Phoenix list here has completely disappeared. 1 sec. Sorry. Let's see if this populates now. Phoenix. So this version's at 71%. Let me just pop this open. I apologize. Sometimes, oh, it's just not going to show me. Okay, so it's at 71% this particular version. And what's interesting with this is you usually see Picklock Prankster in the slot here. We see that in the Grixis version. But this version here, smaller sample size, only about 40 games, but playing Thing in the Ice in addition to Picklock Prankster. And then no Ledger Shredder. So kind of an interesting inclusion there. We see cheap removal in Fiery Impulse, Lightning Axe, and Torch the Towers. Some Spell Pierces in here. Sleight of Hand, Otherworldly Gaze to fill your graveyard. Ops, Consider. So lots of cheap removal. Izzet Charm can be removal. It can be card draw and looting. It can be counterspell. And then we see Treasure Cruise to refill your hand afterwards. So you can kind of bounce everything. You have Arclight Phoenix. Prankster helps you mill to find your Arclights, as well as just being a reasonable creature. Offense, defense, blocks you early game as well. So kind of a interesting take. The other version usually sees Ledger Shredder in place here. We then go to Grixis Phoenix. So this version here, a little bit different. It's Grixis in the sense that it plays Arclight Phoenix, but it's a blue-black deck that's going to be reanimating Phoenix. So similar kind of conception where you have your Picklock Prankster, Ledger Shredder, Considers, a bunch of cheap kind of cycle effects, Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, then Bitter Triumph. You can discard your Phoenix as well, so catch-all removal. With all this card draw, you have Shieldred, you can Shieldred and then Treasure Cruise to gain 6 life. So different kind of take with the Phoenix deck. I wanted to feature them both side by side so you can get a feel and see which one you prefer from your own gameplay perspective. We then go to Rakdos Sacrifice. This one is, I'm sorry, sometimes it acts up like this. So this Rakdos Sacrifice is at 69.4%, and this is an interesting one. We usually don't see Sacrifice do too well in Best of One. This version's integrating a couple copies of Anvil in addition to the Witch's Oven. So a few more sacrifice effects, trimming down the number of Unlucky Witness, a single copy of Village Rites in here, still have Claim, still have Fatal Push, you have your Cat Oven Loops that plays with Mayhem Devil, Crocs in here, still your Blood Tithe, Deadly Dispute, fewer copies of Fable in lieu of another card, Zev Expertise, steal their big Amalia turn, and then there's 2 copies of Osier, any ping, so ping from Mayhem Devil, ping from Anvil deals 4 instead, which is kind of cool. And then an interesting one of Massacre Girl in the top end. Some interesting choices. I could see Sacrifice, especially in a low creature, being pretty well to just steal like their cheap stuff, sacrifice it away. Claim and stuff like that is really good against kind of these small creature mirrors like the humans and stuff like that. but this particular version is at 69%. We then go to Azorius Spirits, 67.5. So this is kind of the tempo flash version. So you have cheap spirits, Wanderer gets bigger and can be a counter spell. Spectral Sailor flashes in, Rattle Chains flashes in, protects your other spirits, and then gives your other spirits flash. Just a couple copies of Shacklegeist, single Spectral Adversary. Shacklegeist helps tap things down. Spectral Adversary can phase things out. A Lord effect in Supreme Phantom. Cheaper, fewer counter spells. Lofty Denial as a single. 4 Geist Snares, which can be as cheap as 1 mana. So usually what you want to do is like put out a threat and then throw on Curious Possession and then protect it, whether it be counter spells or like Rattle Chains. You have some card advantage engines in Errant and Giada. Lets you play cards off the top of your library with Flash or Flying, which happens to be pretty much every card in this deck. Catilda as life gain and then gets bigger and can also be played from the graveyard as an enchantment. Single Skyclave as some removal, and then Spell Queller is kind of a counter spell on the stack, one way around Supreme Verdict kind of effect. And some copies of Portable Hole in the main, which is interesting. Single Meta Vault in the mana base. In the mono blue version, you'd see things like Faceless Haven, but this version, because you're playing so many duels, doesn't make sense. And a single Cavernous Souls to make your things uncounterable. We then go to Mono Red Burn, and this version here. So there's 2 versions. There's 168.3 and 167.4. Slightly higher win rate, but I don't necessarily love the collateral damage. I think this version's a little bit better built. So it's basically the difference. You're kind of trading off the Dreadhorde Arcanist package for like Kumano and then some Bone Crusher Giants. They're fairly similar. I think like you're probably better off with like this version here, but this has got higher creature density, so maybe we'll look at this one here. They're pretty similar, all things considered. The Arcanist decks can kind of run away with it at times, but the core of this deck is a lot of cheap burn and then some wizards to mix in. So Gitu Lava Runner, Swiftspear is not a wizard, but can just be a haste enabler. With all the burn, gets bigger. You have some Soulscar Mage, you have Viashino Pyromancer, which deals 2 on ETB. Your Dreadhorde Arcanist is a wizard, and then like Kumano pumps your team. Collateral damage is an interesting one, just a 1 mana, sack a creature, deal 3 damage, so fixed Lightning Bolt at home. Monstrous Rage, really nice with like the pump effects. You can also pump Arcanist if you want to flash back some of your bigger spells. Single copy of Shock as a 5th copy of like the Play of Fire effects. Wizard's Lightning, Skewer as additional bolts, and then light up the stage 4 card advantage. In this mana base, you should be playing Sokuzan, you should be playing Ramanat Bruins as well. So kind of some ideas if you just want to go low to the ground burn. Some of this burn is actually helpful because you can break up the Amalia combo as well. I don't know why it's doing this, but Boros Heroic. It's at 49%. 49 games, 67%. First day back after New Year's, and the brain's not working the way it used to be. But this deck is throwing kind of pump effects onto your creatures. So you have the heroic elements of Favored Hoplite. When you target it, it gets a counter and prevents combat damage. You have Illuminated Virtuoso that gets double strike, and you can Connive, which puts more counters on. So the big thing with this deck is you kind of have a creature out, you throw on a bunch of pump effects, give it trample with the double strikes, very powerful, with like Ancestral Anger, with Monstrous Rage. You have Reckless Rage as a removal spell that targets your creature, so you get the bonus. Yours often can outscale the 2 damage dealt to your creature while dealing 4 to your opponent. And then you have like God's Willing as protection, Defiant Strike Cycles, Homestead Courage is nice if you flash back. Like you can connive it and then flash it back for value as well. So just very aggressive deck, another Dreadhorde deck, which got the companion. Then go to Rakdos Midrange. So like I said, a lot of the decks have kind of shifted to having Inti in there or Smuggler's Copter as kind of a slightly more aggressive version of the deck. But this version here, we see Fatal Push, we see Thoughtseize. Honestly, even having a couple copies of Torch the Tower probably wouldn't be the worst idea, but this version is playing like Hidetsugu Consumes All for the one it drops in the main. Bitter Triumph, go for the Throat, Molten Collapse, just some removal options along with Bone Crusher Giant. Blood Tithe Harvester, Bank Buster in here. So a lot of 2-for-1 value, Fables, Trespassers kind of mixed into there, Shieldred on your top end, and a single copy up the end. Utility lands and Castle Lockwing, Den of the Bugbear, Hive the Eye Tyrant, and Takenuma. So just lots of different ways to 2-for-1 your opponent. Usually these Rakdos decks, they're strong and they can line up really well, but the big kind of bonus of these Rakdos decks comes from the ability to sideboard. So either shifting like discard package, like if you're playing in best of 1, you keep a hand with 2 Fatal Push against Azorius Control, you basically have 2 dead cards for most of the game. Whereas in best of 3, you can kind of re-tailor your deck to kind of adjust for it better. We then go to Mono Black Waste Not, 64.1%. So another deck where at times can look great, at other times a little awkward. But the core of the deck is built around Waste Not. When your opponent discards cards, you get a value. So whether it be tokens, extra mana, or card draw. With this deck here, you have things like Duress, Thoughtseize, Hopeless Nightmare to kind of supplement things. You have Liliana's, Rankle's Pranks, so a whole bunch. They're finally off Turgid, which is just more of a win more card. A lot of cheap removal in this deck. Shieldred's kind of cool that you see. Aklazot's Deepest Betrayal, another discard enabler, gains you some life, and then gives you some payoff when your opponent's hellbent with no cards in hand. Virtue Persistence is another cheap kind of creature land. What's kind of cool, we're seeing tech-wise, we have Sunken Citadel, which basically can produce 2 mana for activated abilities. So you have activated abilities in things like Maze Mind Tome, so it can fire up that on its own. The single Hopeless Nightmare, not so much, but still something that can be done. But the big kind of core of the deck is Gaia Reach Sanitarium. So if your opponent has no cards in hand, this forces them to draw and discard, so it still triggers Waste Not, and this reduces the cost of the Gaia Reach. Also reduces the cost of things like Field of Ruin, Demolition Field, and Castle Lockwing, technically by 1 mana. So a lot of kind of cheap ways to enable with the Sunken Citadel line. This version was likely copied over from Best of 3, where they probably play Path to Peril in the sideboard, so they're playing a couple copies of Bright Climb Pathway. I would suggest just switching this to more swamps, or if you want, play like 1 more swamp, 1 more like field style effect, or even just like another Hive the Eye Tyrant. You don't need white mana in this deck in the best of 1 format. Kind of a cool one. Smaller sample size, 54%, but we have Simic Merfolk, a deck that we haven't seen too much in these meta breakdowns. Sinnoh Scout, Kumena Speaker, as well as Misclose Herald, all cheap creatures. Unblockable, gets bigger with islands or merfolks, and then explores to get you some virtual card advantage. Deep-Root Pilgrimage, so gives you more creatures as you go wide. Now notably, when you attack, it's 1 or more, so it's all the same instance. So if you attack with 5, you don't get 5 tokens. But with Kumena, you can just tap another merfolk you control. Kumena can't be blocked for this turn. So you can do it 5 times as 5 different instances to get 5 tokens, which is kind of cool. To get that value from it. So it lets you kind of go wide in that sense. Lord Effect and Merfolk Mistbinder, you have some Tricksters to kind of screw up your opponent's abilities or just tap down blockers. Vodian Hexcatcher is a Lord with Counterspell tied to it. Deshaun's Tidebender is Stifle on a stick. And then Collected Company helps you find your spells. So you're not really killing things in this deck, but you can be aggressive. And then kind of tempo-oriented, counter stuff without counters, stifle things without stifle, card advantage kind of mixed into there. Caverns in here, Secluded Courtyards, so a whole bunch of kind of value with that. And then lastly, we have Boros Convoke. So this one here, I actually went Platinum to Mythic rank. The Diamond version of this deck was playing the Boros extra turn spell. They were playing 3 Venerated Loxodon. Like it was like they took this tier deck and was like, I'm going to play my pet card and then kind of skew the numbers, which didn't make sense. But the kind of core of this deck is either turn 1 Ornithopter, Gleeful Demolition, the Ornithopter, get 3 1/1s, or you could turn 1 Thraben Inspector or Voldaren Epiture, turn 2 Gleeful Demolition, and then you get 4 bodies plus an extra mana with the second land to convoke either Knight Errant of Eos or Venerated Loxodon. So you can go very wide with this deck. Then you can also go very tall with Regal Bunnicorn. The Imidane's Recruiter powers up your team, and then you have Embercleave to also throw on something as well. So this is another deck that can definitely steal wins. Just being very kind of single target removal isn't great against it. Your big threats are 5 mana, so they also get around Fatal Push, and then just puts a lot of pressure onto your opponent in that regard. You do kind of, you don't draw your Knight Errant, you usually just dump your hand, and then if you can't really refill it, you're kind of top decking. But with especially the hands where you could like turn 2 Knight Errant, get 2 more cards, especially if you could start chaining together Knight Errants, it's really good value in that respect. That's it for the week. Let me know what you think. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.